I saw a CNN piece the other day where they said, oh, my goodness, it looks like the Chinese may have lied, as if this was breaking news.
The China threat with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the show.
This information is coming from random actors around the world.
We're not going to underwrite the World Health Organization.
Europe is now facing a choice between freedom and tyranny.
Distrust but verify when it comes to China. China's given us a lot, right? They've given us cheap goods and a lot of lies. Why should we believe anything that they have to say?
Let's begin with China. So China is in large part responsible for the spread of this virus. They knew there was human-to-human transmission weeks before they informed the rest of the world of this. 5 million citizens left Wuhan province. Well, apparently they knew that this thing was spreading. What sort of measures should the United States be looking to take in the future to either seek recompense from the Chinese government or to protect ourselves from future situations like this?
Yeah, Ben, you've got both of those facts right. Two missions. First, to hold accountable the parties responsible for the deaths here in the United States and the enormous economic costs that have been imposed on the United States. And frankly, you talk about the international implications, the whole world, the entire global economic system, the ecosystem all around the world has been decimated in ways we've not seen in our lifetimes.
The China threat with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the show.
Sean, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Before I get into the questions, I just want to say I think there's three groups in America when it comes to politicians. People who have their head in the sand when it comes to China, people who talk a good game, and people who are willing to do what it takes to fight China. You are in that later category, and I want to make sure viewers understand. For too long, we've heard people talk about China. You're finally doing something about China, and I appreciate it, and I think people need to understand that.
Everybody needs to recognize that the Chinese Communist Party for decades now has taken advantage of America. That's the starting point. 50 years of failed policy.
In many cases, you see American media is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. Big media empires have operations, right? It's 1.4 billion people in China, and they want to serve that market, so they want to sell their movies or their streaming products there, and so they often bend a knee, kowtow to them. It's unfortunate. So that means their news organizations oftentimes too are reluctant to cover these transgressions from China, and in worse, Mark, sometimes they actually mouth Chinese propaganda. That's the worst of it all.
Where we thought, if we just engage, if we're nice to them, if we do business with them, then somehow they'll leave us be. Well, we know that's not been the case. It didn't work. I gave some remarks about that a couple weeks back at the Nixon Library, and President Trump knew it. He campaigned on this very issue. He said, we just want this to be fair. We don't mean anything ill will towards the Chinese people, but the Chinese Communist Party has been walking on the United States for decades, and we're not going to let that happen. Enough. And so we've begun to push back in ways that are real, that protect the American people. You see it with what we're doing on Chinese software. You see it with what we're doing in terms of diplomats here who were conducting spying out of our consulate in Houston. The president has permitted us to seriously respond in ways that simply say, be fair, be reciprocal, whether it's trade or whether it's diplomats or whether it's information campaigns, misinformation campaigns. The United States is no longer going to simply turn the other cheek and let Americans suffer for it.
We're reaching out to countries all across the world to help them do the right thing, to help their economies get started back up, to make sure that when the time is right, we can get international travel kicked back up so that global commerce can recommence. You can get demand back up. That'll matter an awful lot to workers right here in the United States of America. We're also working with those countries to make sure they understand that this was, in fact, a virus that originated in Wuhan, China, that the Chinese government knew about this certainly by December of 2019, and that they failed to comply with their most fundamental obligations as a nation, and importantly, too, failed to comply with the international health regulations of the World Health Organization.
When you treat Americans poorly, when you steal our intellectual property, when you threaten our people all across the world, under this new national security law, they've now come after at least 2 American citizens. When you conduct a human rights violation on the scale you're doing in the western part of the country with respect to the Uyghurs, when you do those things, America is no longer going to stand idly by, and President Trump is going to be cost imposing with the objective to ask them to do the right thing. We're going to distrust, and then we're going to go verify. And we aim to induce change in the Chinese Communist Party's behavior. It's that straightforward. Americans people deserve it, and our national security demands it.
The nature of the trade relationship between the United States and China has been fundamentally broken for a long time. No administration before ours has been willing to confront that. We failed to protect intellectual property. We failed to make sure that we protected those industries here in the United States that needed that for our national security. You see an example here with respect to issues that preserve our capacity to respond to global health crises. But there's a broader set of national security implications there as well. We're not going to underwrite the World Health Organization. It's not an attempt to punish anyone. It's an attempt to say, my goodness, this mission failed. This organization failed in its mission to protect the world from this global pandemic. We're not going to let that happen again, and we're going to set up something, a system, which delivers an outcome, which reduces the risk that anything like this can never happen again from China or from any place else.
It's the Chinese Communist Party that's forcing this choice. The choice isn't between the United States, it's between freedom and tyranny.
Western countries believed they could change the Chinese Communist Party. They thought the spread of freedom was inevitable. But he described how the Chinese regime instead took advantage of the West's goodwill and is now deeply intertwined with the U.S. and Europe. Pompeo explained that democracy isn't fragile in the way that the CCP believes it is. It's authoritarian regimes that are fragile, while democracies are strong.
There's nothing brave or visionary about oppressing your fellow men or women. Democracy is the only system of government that honors human dignity and personal freedom and progress for mankind.
And then I would say to business leaders all around the world, and I hear it from them too, small, medium businesses operating in China, and even the world's largest businesses, I think they now can see the political risk associated with operating in China when the Chinese Communist Party refuses to uphold basic norms of transparency, basic set of functions that preserve human rights, and the things that need to happen just to make sure that the globe doesn't end up in crises like that. I think out of their own economic interest, they're going to make very different decisions going forward. I think that's completely appropriate for them to evaluate that. When our media refuses to report on the fact that, even to this day, Mark, the Chinese Communist Party hasn't allowed an investigation into where this began inside of Wuhan, that's so telling. I saw a CNN piece the other day where they said, oh, my goodness, it looks like the Chinese may have lied, as if this was breaking news. It was stunning to see a major media outlet behave in that way. And unfortunately, it deceives the American people and doesn't give them information that's important for them to protect their liberty and their freedom.
I just want every American to know, go to trusted sources. Get this information from places that you have confidence in that. Go to those places so that you can see what America is really doing. We're delivering good outcomes for the American people, and we can't allow disinformation, state actors and others who want to undermine what we're doing here in the United States. They present risk to each of us, and we need to be mindful of that and go only to trusted sources for good, reliable information.